lawyers who put together wills. What is the craziest, oddest thing someone wanted to put in theirs? Story 1. When my great-aunt, whom I barely had any relationship with, died, I discovered that in her will, she left me a taxidermy giant silk moth that she had hanging on her wall. Evidently, someone told her about my love for bugs. I still have it, and it's one of the coolest things in my collection of odd knickknacks. She left my cousin a Furby. Story 2. Not a will, but a deed. The city I work for was renovating a small park that was donated to the city in the 1910s. We went looking through the handwritten deed for easements or other restrictions and found that the family could claw the property back if the park were not perpetually provided with a fountain of pleasant running water fit for consumption by man and beast alike. The family still has descendants in town, so we installed a new water fountain with a dog bowl filler just to be safe. Story 3. Dead Kitten said here to my daughter, and who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear fourth husband John, who laid hands on my Jane, I leave $1, you money-grubbing bastards. To Jane I leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 and my best gun, which I leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Story 4. I work in probate. The oddest thing I've seen in a will is to euthanize their beloved horse, have it cremated and its ashes scattered with the decedent. Lucky for her horse. She named a horse that was already dead, so the one she got afterwards lived to see another farm. Story 5. My grandfather passed a few hours ago, but my grandmother came to me after with a navy blue tie featuring pink elephants, ridiculous looking, but she said that he wore it to intimidate people in business, as someone willing to wear such a ridiculous tie doesn't care about what people think. That scares people. So he wanted me to have it, so I could do the same edit. I will add an edit with a picture later. To everyone, thank you. Edit 2. It's not as in your face as some of you likely thought, but I love it. Story 6. My grandma left a penny and a nasty comment to almost every person in the will, all of her sons and daughters, even a few grandchildren, except for me. I got $1,000. Thanks, Grandma. Story 7. My sister's mother-in-law is leaving her house to her 3 sons. If one wants to sell out his third of the house, he has to sell it to the other 2 brothers for one. Story 8. Lots of people sending their friends and family on weird errands to spread their ashes, leaving money for people to take trips and spread their ashes around the world. Pet trusts are a fun one, leaving a hole of money in a trust to be used for the care of the pet during their life. However, my favorite ever that I obviously didn't draft was a lawyer who left the bulk of his estate, millions in today's dollars, to whatever Toronto area woman had the most children at a specific date some years in the future. I recall the winner had 10. Story 9. Hay Race 1 from one of my dad's law partners. He had a lady come in with an itemized list of books and wanted her will to contain all of the books and who will get what based on her choosing. So basically she decides who gets what specific book instead of letting her beneficiaries decide. The truly astonishing thing is how many books and how specific they get. According to Dad's law partner, her list is at about 2,000 books to be divided among about 30 people. She is apparently very specific and comes back at least once a year to add all the new books she's gotten. Story 10. Not a lawyer, but an aging woman my family knew left her house large and in a very affluent neighborhood, an estate to family friends for so long as her cats were alive and taken care of in said house. After they died, the house was to be sold and the remaining estate donated. The weird thing is, it's been like 20 years and the cats are still alive. Also, they've changed color. Story 11. I'm the executor of my grandmother's will. I also get the house and everything in it and a share of life insurance that's split 3 ways between myself, sister, and mom. My mom has always said that all my dad, my grandmother's son-in-law, would like to have is some table. Well, in the will, there's like a whole paragraph that states how my dad gets nothing. He doesn't lay a finger on anything in the house or any money, how my dad is basically worthless and deserves nothing, and how he was a dad, and that she begrudgingly has my mom in the will. Thanks, Grandma. I'll appreciate the awkwardness. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but my mom put in her will that if she dies under suspicious circumstances that my sister and I won't be left anything. She watches a lot of true crime. Story 13. I early 20s was forced to write a will due to the health insurance I get at work, and amongst sensible stuff, the in-house lawyer said it was totally okay for this clause to be added. My funeral wishes are that I be buried in a coffin, which has been spring-loaded, such that opening the coffin would cause alarm to future archaeologists. Then a bunch of stuff about if this is to costly ID be cremated and have my ashes scattered in a specific place. Edit. Thank you for the gold. Story 14 saw this answer from a similar question some time ago. When a dad died, he set up financial installments. So long as his daughter remains under a certain weight, Dude was controlling her diet from the grave. Story 15. My old landlord took 2 years to boot me out because her mother who owned the place died and she wanted to sell the place. But her mother's carer said the mother verbally promised the house to her. Even though it was not written in the will, it still took 2 years of fighting in court to clear things up. No, the carer didn't get it in the end, even after all the appeals. Story 16. Lady wanted her small dog to be buried with her. If the dog happened to be alive when the lady passed, she wanted the dog put down and then join her. Edit, thank you, kind stranger, for the silver. Story 17. Just last week, I handled a matter where the parents left millions in artwork to various people, wads of cash to various charities, and only left their kids the family cats. Turns out they did it because the kids got them the cats to comfort the parents in their old age, and the parents hated the cats, but the kids wouldn't let them get rid of the cats. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but my grandpa put in his will a chocolate bar for every one of his grandkids. Well, I have like 12 cousins, and very difficult to track down where a couple of them went. All this estates and money he had was at a standstill for months because they couldn't find my couple cousins. Had a show court, we put an effort to hire someone to track them down, etc. The lawyer that was helping execute the will was blown away that this lawyer allowed this, and why he wouldn't highly suggest not to do it. But I'm not complaining because I got a Toblerone out of the deal. Edit, thanks for first gold star. Story 19. This one isn't necessarily crazy, just an interesting glimpse into the mind of a kind old woman in her 90s. My aunt and uncle both were more like parents, and incredibly beautiful people passed away within a few weeks of one another. When my uncle became ill, the aunt tried to work on a will with her long-term lawyer, but she was kind of just old and out of it. Her main concern the entire time was small knickknacks like a jar of pennies she wanted a distant cousin to have, or a used jacket from the 70s she bequeathed to a sister-in-law. It was quite touching how much time she spent carefully considering each item and who would get it. Most of the items were used and didn't even really hold any sentimental value. She just wanted them to go to good homes. When she passed away, everyone knew exactly who was getting each odd item. The real kicker is when the lawyer told the primary beneficiaries that she never got around to the bigger assets and all that jazz. She basically told the lawyer, pay for our funeral and anything we owe, and then family members X, Y, and Z can figure out the rest. It ended up being millions in homes, lakefront property, jewelry, antique firearms, vehicles, life insurance policies, stocks, bonds, gold coins, etc., etc. Luckily, the family is very close, and everything went off without a hitch. They were amazing people who wanted to keep family items in the family. They just didn't put that much weight on their incredible wealth. They also hid their wealth amazingly. We all knew that they were very comfortable, but no one had any idea they were deep in 8-figure assets. It was just funny to see a random niece get a set of plastic cups, worn dance shoes, and a check for $125,000. Story 20. So this is related. Worked on a divorce up, a couple who fought over every single thing in the house, separating pillows and such. They were left 52 gallons of vanilla extract by her grandmother. In a secondary proceeding, he was awarded all but 5 gallons. 2 weeks later, he sent in a case of samples in Ziploc baggies to our office along with a request to subpoena a urine test from his ex-wife to prove she pissed in the jugs before he picked them up. We never needed to, as she screamed in court that she pissed them full just like he pissed all over her during their marriage. They were neat. This same couple went to court for nearly 2 years over a Beanie Baby collection. They had 3 kids. Story 21. My grandpa gave me all his tools, which sounds dumb, but we're in the same trade, and it was a real life changer. It included a lift in his old shop truck, so I pretty much got everything to start my own shop, but a building a pretty good chunk of change, and his dog Tanner. As long as I made sure his living girlfriend at the time got nothing at all, and I told my uncle he was fat, and his wife was going to leave him if she couldn't find his pecker. There was literally a script inside the will. It all went smooth, and my uncle lost weight, and Janice isn't, and it turns out Tanner is kind of in too, but it's okay, because my grandpa was kind of a good one, but still sort of in, and they have the same mustache and eyebrows, so now I come home from work every day and get stared down by my grandpa while I... Story 22. When my grandfather passed, his will asked that I clean out his shed, and I found marijuana seeds, old real-style film pornography, which was hilarious, and a bunch of other unsavory paraphernalia. 50s flick knives too. Story 23. In my mom's will, which I have seen, she has left me the kitchen table and chairs. She lives on a South Manchester council estate. My brother gets the sideboard. Story 24. Not a lawyer. Work for a will writers trust specialist in the UK. Currently studying toward my TP. One of our earlier clients passed recently. Turns out the man she left almost everything to, including the residue of her estate, which was considerable, was a regular taxi driver. She had also named him as her executor, He had no clue. The woman named as her executor and main beneficiary on her previous two wills, a close friend of many years, was understandably flabbergasted and contested the will. We responded to her solicitor's Lark v. Nugas request, informed Mr. Taxi Driver, who didn't even know our client had passed, and the will was upheld. Aforementioned friend was left a legacy of $5,000, if I remember correctly, but her nose was clearly out of joint. Bonus observation: it takes a lot less than $5,000 being up for grabs to make families turn against each other. Can get really nasty. One of the most startling things I've learned in my short time in this business. Story 25, not a lawyer, but I worked with plenty of estates and trust accounts over the years. This particular scenario isn't so much about the will itself being strange, but the circumstances that led up to the trust account being opened. I used to work at a bank in the estates department. I was an administrator who had to manage the files, including encroachments upon the capital, i.e., I want to take some money out now. Please, I had this one account, multi-million-dollar trust for one single beneficiary, the son of the deceased. What's interesting is that the son killed the parents with a hammer in grotesque and brutal fashion. He pleaded insanity. He would call once a year from the penitentiary mental hospital, requesting $50 for commissary to buy chips and gum. The call was always strange. He was very polite, very doped up. The quality of the call was always very tinny, like he was far away from the phone. Story 26, I read a lot of estate documents as part of my job. There's so much subtle shade in them occasionally. They can be pretty entertaining. One super wealthy lady had a huge section for the care and well-being of her pets, with primary and successor caretakers. A certain amount of money from the trust for care and feeding of each pet. One pet owner might receive $3,000 a month to take care of one of her pets after she passed, and certain stipulations on how they were to be cared for. While some might see it as excessive, the language and stipulations she had, and how they were referred to, show that she really, really loved her pets. In that same will and trust, she also left a slew of people only $1, so that there would be no chance they could take the trust to probate court on the basis that they were merely forgotten. That part had so much subtle shade. A lot of they know what they did, they're well aware of their guilt in the matter, etc. That she split up about $2 million among 5 or 6 different animal rescues and animal welfare charities. It was around 200 pages long, and I swear I read the entire thing just for the sheer entertainment value. Story 27, I once wrote a will for a guy who thought he could get away from giving his ex-wife half his assets by putting them in a will for his kids. Doesn't work like that, buddy boy. Story 28, not a lawyer, but my grandmother's will stated that my father had to outlive her by a certain amount of time. I honestly don't remember exactly how long. I was 15, my father died less than a month after she did. So, instead of things going to my father, the next step was the estate being divided between me, my sister, and 2 cousins. It was so bizarre. Story 29, not a lawyer yet, but one interesting case in inheritance law that I came across was the one of a super rich owner of a private bank, who left his shares to his sons under the condition and restraint that they will act as managers of the private bank, but with a personal liability concerning the bank's debt. So what he did was giving them the money and commit them to lifelong work in the bank, while putting their own assets at risk. So when one of the sons decided to sell his shares because he was old and sick, the courts had to decide whether he gets any money from the will. The condition was not fulfilled anymore, as he gave up the manager position. One other son wanted to sell his shares. Of course, that would not have been allowed under the condition either. Edit for those interested. These are the court rulings for the case OL Chin 21 U183607 and BGH 4ZAR 20207. Story 30, am not a lawyer, but my dad put something really weird in his will. A 17-year-old last year was the recipient of a rock thrown at my head. I owed it to my dad's quirky sense of humor, and he probably thought that it would be the funniest to ever happen. And it was even any special rock, it was one you'd find at the bottom of a river. Anyways, this year, I was reading some of the stuff he had written, as I was never allowed to see the will, being that I was too young at the time and didn't think he'd end up dying. Regardless, the note under my name and recipient items I was to get if he died was throw this rock at and hit him in the head with it, but make it surprising. And I was thinking, what kind of a will is this? Then I read a little further on, and he had left a note saying this is the rock that I had hit him in the head with when he was teaching me how to skip rocks when I was younger, and I hit him so hard it dented his skull above his ear, and it never really healed. It was the most meaningful thing he'd ever done, and after all the years me and my dad had messed around with each other, it was his way of winning and taking the final crack at me. It was so heartfelt it moved to tears. He got the last laugh, and I was completely okay with it. Edit, thank you for my first gold. Edit, thank you for the silver-carrying stranger. Story 31 might be late to the party and not a lawyer, but my great-granddad had a clause in his will that stated something along the lines of, If any of the beneficiaries decide to dispute the contents of the decedent's estate, their share becomes one and nothing else. Seemed like a pretty good way to maintain harmony among his survivors. Story 32. My grandfather left me 100. He had dementia and confused my dad, ripping him off with me. He left the rest of the family between 100,000 and a few million each. They all said they felt horrible because they knew the details, but not horrible enough to give up any of their share. The way I see is it was never my money to begin with. So it's not a loss. I'm just glad my sister got 100,000. She needed it more than any of the others. Story 33. My own grandmother specified which of the children and grandchildren should get which of the family recipes, and somehow felt the need to include commentary about why certain decisions were made. One recipe was this Prohibition-era recipe for beer, which I knew my uncle, also a home brewer, wanted, but she left it to me with the comment that I know you wanted it, Teddy, but she has the second best penmanship of the girls, and will make you a copy. And then like 8 pages later, in among the specific descriptions of her vast collection of romance novels really, was a line and specific Jude Devereaux titled to Spidey, who will please subtract about half the hops before she copies the beer recipe for her Uncle Teddy so that any of us can drink it. Our John had his IPA last summer and just about died. Uncle John just about burst into tears laughing, and Uncle Teddy had long since left the room because he has no whatsoever to give about romance novels. Uncle John, of course, was still in the room because there was also still Yangling. And no, I have no idea how she got this well done. My guess is she wrote it herself, and the law students who come to her independent living building signed off on it. It was elaborate, that's for sure. Total value of the estate was well under $8,000, so it was mostly a funny last letter from Grandma. Story 34. Not a lawyer, but helped drive a dear elderly friend of mine to his appointments to have his will redone after his wife died. He was a member of a VFW that was very badly mismanaged, to the point they were coming to him to bail them out of debt for thousands every other month. At the same time this was happening, the commander of that VFW had his wife begging to borrow money for their personal account as well. He tried to have it put in his will that while he had planned on leaving the majority of his money to the VFW, he could not in good faith leave the money, knowing it would be so badly mismanaged, and probably used to offset the addictions of people in charge. Attorney would not allow that, but he did agree to hold a letter with the man's explanation for after his death. I am assuming the attorney did send it, because I know the commander and his awful wife have been stirring up trouble with the man's family, trying to have his will contested. Story 35. When my great-granddad died in his will, he stated that his coin collection be split equally across his family. There was like 8 to 9 of us and 3 potato sacks full of coins, so we all gathered around a table, and each took 1 coin each until nothing was left. Among the coins was an iron cross, which was quite odd, as the only person on that side of the family that went to war was his dad, and he served with the Anzacs in WW1. Story 36. I am a qualified solicitor. My favorite 2 are 1. A lady wanted to create a trust fund of $100,000 for her pet fish. When I asked if it was a special kind of fish, she confirmed it was just a normal goldfish, but she wanted it to be fed fresh avocado every day and be looked after by a local dog walker after she died. She was absolutely serious. 2. Another lady confessed she had a secret daughter, and she wanted to leave the daughter some money and photographs without the rest of her family finding out. Even her husband does not know. That will be a fun conversation when she passes away. Story 37. Not really the question, but related. A lawyer once advised my 90-years-old aunt to adopt me, 24 at the time, to avoid paying inheritance tax. Now I'm not a big fan of tax avoidance, but her last name is Falcon in my language, which is immensely cooler than my current surname. Almost would have done it. Edit. A lot of people are asking why I haven't or saying I should have. There are several things giving me grief about that plan. Not only that I really loathe tax avoidance from all my heart. In the end, it wasn't even necessary. My aunt just gifted me parts of the land she wanted to bequeath to me. So neither the gift nor the inheritance will come over the tax exemption amount. Story 38. Had a very attractive woman with terminal cancer try to get herself stuffed by a taxidermist and given to some rich guy that had been basically a sugar daddy to her for a few months. She said he would give me $1 million a week allowance as long as it was in an official will that he could see. I sent her to a lawyer who I knew that would do about anything for $1 because I didn't want to end up in the news when she died. That was 2 years ago. No clue what happened to her. Story 39. My grandmother had her done when she was in her 60s. Nothing really wrong with that. But when she died, she wanted an open casket with her on display. Really, Nana. She passed away at 80 and got exactly what she asked for. Granddad had ended up sticking 2 strategically placed daisies on her, so she got what she wanted, and so did Granddad. R.I.P. Granny. You silly beseech. Love you. Story 40, a relative worked for a firm preparing wills and was confronted by an executor who had an edict to scatter the deceased's ashes from a microlight aircraft. He couldn't fly one. She kindly pointed out to him that the drafting said nothing about whether said microlight was in flight at the time of scattering. Story 41, random question. Could I just pick a random name in the phone book and add them to my will? It would be funny to have part of my will portion out with odd requests for random strangers. Story 42, this thread has inspired me to make my will something special that will be talked about in generations to come. Is it legal to let your descendants fight? Not actual fighting. More like a tournament for your inheritance, because the idea of my grandchildren having to play a basketball tournament to see who gets my car is something I greatly enjoy. Story 43, not me. But whenever I visited my old grandma in Nicaragua, it would always seem my aunts and uncles would be weirdly nice to her. Almost as if she was a famous person, people would be visiting her house to greet her and strike a conversation. One day, my mother walked into my grandma's room to have a conversation with her. I remember during the flight back 3 to 4 after the conversation, I asked her what the conversation was about. She told me that grandma used to have children that almost never talked to her, and now that she's sickly, they're trying to act nice to get stuff out of her will. My grandma wanted to talk to my mom to ask her what she wanted from the house. My mom was always the favorite growing up since she's Cherie's grandma, and grandma wanted to pay her back for being a good daughter. My mom replied with, "I don't want anything for you. I just want your love," and they both smiled at each other. Also, she wanted us to take a washing machine back home to sell it for cash, but we declined. FYI, she's still alive. Grandma ain't giving up yet. Story 44, worked with a client who wanted language that her cats would be euthanized and buried with her. We had to explain why legally we couldn't do that. The moral part just went over her head. One of the few clients who ever got under my skin. Story 45, not a lawyer, but had a very interesting experience when my grandma passed. My family has pretty much moved on from where my grandma lived, except myself and my children. Every week I went to her house for dinner. When I had my youngest, who is 1 now, she cooked me a meal every day to feed my family, so I wasn't drowning. None of her other grandchildren or children spent any time with her. When she passed, there was a lot that everyone wanted, but she left everything to me, even a stash of gold coins that she had buried in her backyard. She didn't have much, but the little things I have from her mean everything to me. It was a huge ordeal, and pretty much everyone hates me, but maybe they should have spent time with her. Story 46, obligatory, not a lawyer. Just something that I experienced many years ago. I used to sell shitty software from a store in England a few years back. One of the pieces of software we used to sell was a will maker program that never sold one copy. So, I'm sitting there on the till when a very smartly dressed older gentleman comes in. Pushing 90, I would imagine. He seemed confused and slightly lost, so I went over there and asked him if he needed help. He said, yes, he did. He was looking for something that would help him make his will, and he didn't want his family to know because they were all fighting over his house and his money. I was slightly taken aback, but I showed him the software we had. He looked at it rather closely, as his eyesight was very poor, and nodded to me that this would be fine. I gave him the disc for free. He thanked me profusely and quietly left the store. I just stood there for a while watching him leave. Story 47, lawyer here. Wrote in my own will that I wish to be cremated, and my funeral shall take place 3 miles offshore. My ashes are to be placed in a small wooden boat. Members of my funeral party will then compete for a 10,000 prize from my estate by shooting flaming arrows at my remains. Crossbows are prohibited. Story 48, my grandfather has in his will to say hi so-and-so, just so he can say that he mentioned that person in his will. He tells lots of people in the family that they are in his will. It's a joke that only he thinks is funny, and he won't be around for the punchline. I think it's brilliant. He has about 10 people mentioned. Story 49, my friend's father was insane, born poor, and had polio. Serve in W-2 and build a business. 10 businesses in various industries. 9 rental homes in 3 states. Bunch of cars and personal property. Sent 5 kids and their kids to college. Took care of his infirm wife for 11 years without a break or assistance. But he was also refused to tell his kids anything. Forbade them from know about his condition or visiting him in the hospital for the 4 years it took him to die. He had transferred all of his assets to a living trust and used a variety of shoddy lawyers to make sure his setup kept running for 2 years after he died with his kids blind to it. It took almost a decade to get access, figure out what he had, and unload it. Burned up almost half of what had accumulated, no apparent reason aside from stubbornness. Story 50, I advised on a will where the deceased had left considerable assets to people who were dead when the will was read. Nothing unusual in that, except that they were long dead when the will was made. The lawyer who made the will seems to have had doubts about his mental state, so sent him to a doctor for tests. The doctor gave him a full bill of health, and said he was perfectly compos mentis. Story 51, okay, caveat, not a will. But I was reviewing a client's prenup, and the paperwork stated that in the event of a divorce, they use a coin flip to determine who would keep any joint property. After 30 days, if they didn't decide what they wanted to do, their ex would then be able to have claim over the home and do with it as they wished. Oddest thing I've ever come across. Story 52, my great-aunt who had no children put in her will that after a certain percent of her money was distributed evenly amongst her nieces and nephews, the remaining money would go to my dad, provided he used it to throw a big family reunion party. Even after her death, she brought the family together. It was a great party in her honor. Story 53, my great-grandfather had a pair of socks that he only wore on Christmas Day with the family. They were hideous. After he passed, we found out he left those socks to my uncle in his will and told him to carry on the tradition, which my uncle has done. I've already been told I'm getting them next. Story 54, my father is heavily involved in my great-aunt and uncle's lives since their health has begun to decline, both mid-90s with no children. And has seen their will, they have a small fortune in excess of $1 million, and have left it all to a local dog's home. When he asked them about it, my great-uncle's response was, nobody has helped me in life, so I won't be helping anybody either. Story 55, my grandfather and his law partner opened a small law firm out of a broom closet in a small Midwestern town in the 50s. Most of their cases were wills and contracts, small-town stuff. His very first client was an old farmer who wanted his will made, that left, among other things, a taxidermy dog to his only son. By the mid-60s, the firm was rapidly outgrowing their tiny office. A local lawyer died suddenly, leaving his office on the town square up for grabs. They took it sight unseen. My granddad and his partner got an awesome lease on huge law office suite on the town square, 30 yards from the courthouse. The first client guy died the very day they got the keys to the new office. His son was the first client at the new office. He came in with the taxidermy dog while they were literally moving boxes. He dealt with his father's estate and planned his own estate, and then he asked my granddad to store the taxidermy dog for a week while he fumigated. My grandfather agreed to put the dog into an unused office, and the guy went on his way. When my granddad moved the dog into an upstairs office, he found a locked wall safe that hadn't been mentioned in the lease. The property owner had no idea it was even there, let alone the combination, and told my granddad he could have whatever he found. My granddad called his best buddies, a couple of young lawyers, doctors, a realtor, and the local mortician, to come help him crack the safe. They tried to crack the safe, even using one of the doctor's stethoscopes. Much to their chagrin, they failed miserably. Feeling defeated, they finally called the local locksmith, who managed to get it unlocked. They paid the locksmith before he looked inside, not knowing what sensitive material they might have found. That was a good call. There was no money, but they found a mason jar full of hashish and a couple of quarts of moonshine. It all magically disappeared, and by complete coincidence, the parties they threw were the stuff of small-town legends. The guy came back for the dog a week later, and my grandfather told him that he thought the dog was a lucky charm. The guy redid his will a few years later and left the taxidermy dog to the firm. It was still there when I was a little girl in the 80s. Every time my granddad would bring me to the office, I would pet it the whole time. Edit thank for the silver, anonymous Redditor. I won't spend it all in one place, XD. Story 56. I had a Russian client, son of an oligarch. His father created a trust which provided dispositive provisions for if he was kidnapped and not found within a certain number of months. Freaked me out. I believe the will had similar language too, but I can't remember now, edited now that I think about it. I believe there was a separate document in addition to the trust that provided that his will should be effective to the extent he was kidnapped and not recovered within a certain period of time. Story 57, my favorite, is Ben Franklin leaving money to the cities of Philadelphia and Boston with the requirement that it be invested for like at least 200 years. It became millions. Story 58, my dad told me this about when my grandpa set up his will. Basically, he first wanted to discuss the who gets what with his family first before putting it into writing. Smart, because that can nip a lot of issues later on in the butt. So my grandpa is sitting down with his two sons discussing who gets what, and my mother and my aunt are there, and they're having a lot of ideas on how to split everything, whether item A is equal to monetary value B, and most importantly, what their respective part of the family could do with what item possession. At some point, my grandpa had enough. He told the wives to leave the room because, hey, quit arguing about my stuff and money like that. I am not dead yet. But the most poignant thing he said was that he was dividing his earthly possession up between his sons, not their wives, not his grandchildren. He had two sons, and they would get the lion's share. There were provisions in there for individual items that he would ask people about. Do you want this? Would that thing make you happy? Could you use X? And he put aside certain monies to be divvied up between the grandchildren, cousins, etc. But he was very firm on who gets what, and he communicated it very clearly. This is my stuff, I decide. And the only input I value is by the two people I've known all their lives. Well, he died and everyone was informed and knew what to expect. My grandma is still alive. Years ago, around the same time that was being drafted, she decided that most of her most valuable possessions should be familiarly taken care of. She labeled all her jewelry. Put them in those little plastic bags that you freeze stuff in, because the bags my grandma uses for that have little labels on them that you can write on. Made the whole thing easy. And then she eventually decided why wait and distributed them as gifts. She was getting up there, and she pretty much never had a cash in to wear jewelry anymore except for one or two beloved items. I feel that there's an important lesson here. Deal with this kind of stuff early. Communicate clearly, preferably when everyone involved is actually there. Live, everyone witnesses it and can't deny it later. Not that there was any danger of that happening in my family, I think, but I guess my grandparents knew inheritance and money in general can rip families apart. And if you want to curb that risk, no matter how insignificant it may seem, you got to address the problem head on. You cannot hide from the problems caused by your death, just like can't hide from death itself. Peace of mind and a family not at risk of engaging in litigation against each other is worth some time and effort.